Hey all, today we're going to talk more about roots, and we are going to talk about how we can combine and do different operations when we have square roots. So we talked about operations when we have exponents. We talked about simplifying square roots and cube roots, and now we're going to talk about operations with these roots. And so the first thing we'll start with our adding and subtracting. And so when we add and subtract, you can see I put the ideas right here. When we add or subtract like roots, that means when you have the same square root symbol with the same number underneath, then we can just add or subtract the coefficients, the numbers in front. So if I look at this first problem, I want to add -3 times the square root of 6 plus 3 times the square root of 6. And so since both of these square roots have the number 6 underneath them, we can just add the two coefficients together. So we can do -3 plus 3. And if you struggle with the positive and negative numbers adding, make sure you use Desmos. -3 plus 3 is 0. So we have 0 root 6. And then we multiply these together. 0 times root 6 is 0. If I look at this one, I'm subtracting. Again, I want to look at the square roots and make sure they're the same. Here they're the same. Again, square root of 6. So I can actually subtract 3 minus 3. And I didn't intend for this to happen in the both two examples, but 3 minus 3 is 0. Root 6. It's sort of like a variable. So, 3x minus 3x is going to be 0x, which is just 0. And so 0 times root 6 is just 0. So I hope that's not confusing that I had two answers that are 0. It's possible that the roots aren't the same, and you can simplify them in order to add or subtract. So here I have a square root of 2 and a square root of 8. I can't subtract right now because they're not the same. It's like x and y, but I can simplify the square root of 8. Remember, we simplify by dividing by a perfect square. So the biggest perfect square I can divide 8 by is 4. 4 times 2. And so we know the square root of 4 is 2. And then the square root of 2, we just leave like that. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the square root of 8 with 2 square root 2. So let me rewrite what that looks like. I'll put it in parentheses. So I can actually multiply this 3 and this 2 to make 6. And now that I have root 2 for both of my terms, I can actually do -3 minus 6. -3 minus 6 is -9. And then I have a square root of 2 still because they both did. And that's as far as I can go. So if you see that they don't have the same square root, don't just say you can't do it. Go ahead and see if you can simplify that one of those square roots and make it look like the other one. Here I have both root 45. And so I can just add 3 plus 2 and I get 5 square root of 45. And then I do want to simplify square root of 45. I can simplify. I can divide it by 9 5 times. I know that 9 is a perfect square. 9 is 3. So this is from a couple lessons ago. And so I'm going to replace that root 45 with 3 root 5. So that looks like this. And then I can do 5 times 3 and get 15 root 5. As I always say, if one of these things is tricky for you, please do make sure that you ask for help as soon as possible before you get too far into this lesson so that we can clear up any misunderstandings, or maybe I can reword something that I've said here to you personally. When we multiply square roots, they don't have to be the same, which is kind of nice. You can just multiply the square roots together, and you would multiply any coefficients they might have. So the coefficients for these two square roots is 1. We just don't write them. So 1 times 1 is 1. That's no big deal. But we could just do 6 times 15. And I'm going to use a little help from a friend, my calculator, just like you can if you want to. 6 times 15 is the square root of 90. They're both staying underneath the square root symbol. And then we can simplify. Square root 90 is the same as the square root of 9 times the square root of 10. And we know the square root of 9 is 3. So our answer is 3 root 10. We should simplify when possible. Here I can just do 6 times 10 and I can get the square root of 60. And then I want to simplify that if I can. I go through and I figure out what's the biggest perfect square I can divide 60 by. I believe it's 4. Goes in there 15 times. Square root of 4 is 2. Root 15. The same thing is true with dividing. Excuse me. When we're dividing, we can divide the coefficients and we can divide things underneath the square roots. So I could do 4 divided by 5. That's going to give me a decimal 0.8. And then if I press that little button on my Desmos, it's going to turn 0.8 back into 4 over 5. So I'm just going to leave that alone. Square root of 10 divided by square root of 5. I can actually do 10 divided by 5 and get 2. And it's underneath the square root sign still. There's my final answer. Over here, I have a coefficient on the top of my fraction of 1. So 1 over 4, that doesn't simplify, so that can stay the same. The square root of 16 divided by the square root of 4, I get square root of 4 because 16 divided by 4 is 4. And then I know what the square root of 4 is. It's 2. And then we should simplify fractions if we can. 2 divided by 4 is 1/2. You can always go into your calculator and do 2 over 4 and get 0.5. Press that button and it'll tell you it's 1/2. So like I said, if any of these were tricky for you in particular, or if maybe it's still tricky for you to simplify a square root, please do be sure to ask for help. Ask for help before you go on to the ones I ask you to answer at the end so that you can clear up any misunderstandings before you try and do some on your own. As always, when you're done with the ones I asked you to do, there's more practice and you should do some of those because the more you practice this, the easier it will become for you. So please do stick around. I have some questions related to these problems. There are 10 of them. So make sure you answer these questions that relate to these problems. You can ask for help while you're doing them. I'd be glad to help you. And take your time and good luck.